So that's something it seems obvious to us now after many centuries, that if we don't get this right about who Jesus is, everything else that we believe about the sacraments or about morality or about prayer, all of those things are going to go off into a place that we don't want to go to. That's not the truth. So all of these early doctors of the church, in one way or another, are dealing with this question. And that's the first ecumenical councils as well. These first 7 ecumenical councils are all treating of who is Jesus, what is the nature of Jesus and the Trinity and the Holy Spirit, and what does that mean for us? What does it mean for us? St. Leo the Great, we don't know when he was born. One of the earliest documents about him is that he became a deacon of the Church of Rome in around the year 430. So in Rome, you have the Pope, and then you have these deacons that served him and served the church. And then you have priests that were out at parishes. Now these deacons were actually very important, very powerful in the early church in those first several hundred years, and they would kind of be directly underneath the Pope. So today, we don't have like these deacons in Rome. What we have now is the curia, the papal curia. So the Pope, will appoint these cardinals and archbishops to lead certain offices and kind of direct the life of the church throughout the whole world. But in the early church, those first several hundred years, you have the Bishop of Rome and then those deacons that served him. So that's how Leo kind of began his career, if you will. Career is a bad word to use. His vocation was to serve as a deacon, and that was for about 10 years. And then in the year 440, he was sent to Gaul, which is modern-day France, as an ambassador to help settle a political issue. So another thing to remember about this time, the 400s, is the Roman Empire is dwindling. It's becoming weaker and weaker in the West. And what happened, if you remember, back in the 300s, Constantine, he moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople. So he basically pulls the whole bureaucratic and all the power and everything over to Constantinople and out of Italy. And as a result, the political structure, the political strength in the Italian peninsula becomes diminished and is not very strong. And so when there is, and one of the direct results of that is that the Bishop of Rome actually steps in and is not just a spiritual authority, but also becomes a political authority, someone who's going to bring stability to the political order at the time. And so, so in my notes, I have to look at it. I have to remember the Pope who sent him. So let's see here. Pope Sixtus III was the Pope, and Leo was his deacon, and Sixtus sent him to what would be modern-day France as an ambassador and to go and to resolve a political issue. It wasn't even what you would strictly call a church issue. It was to go and to bring peace between these two civil rulers. And so while he's gone up in France, Pope Sixtus dies. Sixtus III, he dies, and Leo is elected Pope, is chosen to be Pope, while he's not even there. All right? And so that's in the year 440, and he's up in France, and when he gets back, he's like, "Oh, you've been elected to be the Pope." And he didn't. Sometimes in history, people would run away. Like, you hear this word, you just get back on your horse and head out of town. Get out of there. But and that's the year 440 is when he is elected and chosen to be Pope. So he's a deacon. So before he can be installed, he has to be ordained a priest and then ordained a bishop, and then he is crowned as Pope. All right, so he goes from just being a deacon to being a priest and then a bishop. And for us, that sounds very strange, very unusual, but at the time, it wasn't that unusual. That often the people there in the city of Rome, they already knew Leo. They already knew that he had the capacity, that he was qualified for this, that he was educated and he had the leadership capacity to do this. So he comes home and then he begins to be Pope. So he is Pope from the year 440 until 461, so 21 years. And if you go and you look on your big poster of all the popes, there's this nice poster, it's got all of them on there. or you look through your history book, 21 years is a long time. And especially back then, when people would die of illness and, for unexpected reasons. And so to reign for a long period of time, and especially in an age when the civil authority was very weak. So the emperor was in Constantinople and would just basically appoint someone to be the head of the western part of the empire, but that assignment wasn't really considered to be a compliment, if you will. All right, it wasn't a sought-after position. If you wanted to have civil authority or civil power, you wanted to get back to Constantinople. That's where the action was. And so Rome, at the height of the Roman Empire, like around the birth of Jesus, around year 0, so the city of Rome would be up at 900,000 or 1 million people, which is amazing. And if you've been to Rome, you see all the ruins and all the fountains, and the Romans were geniuses, architecturally and civilly in all these ways. And then what happens over those 400 years, from the time of Jesus up into the 400s, it diminishes and it goes down in population, and so it loses its civil authority, its political power. And then the Bishop of Rome kind of steps in there and fills that vacuum, and people look to him to resolve certain issues. So with all the doctors of the church, I was trying to think, what's something that makes Leo different? And the other doctors, many of them are members of a religious order, and they're mystical authors. So St. Teresa of Avila, or St. Catherine of Siena, even St. Bonaventure, who I talked last year, he was a bishop, but that's not really why he's a doctor of the church. But when a pope is named a doctor of the church, the pope, you have to remember, he's exercising, this supreme office of being the shepherd. So just before all this, for our spiritual life, for all of us gathered here tonight, what is the church? What is it? It is the presence of Christ in the world. So I just heard this talk a couple of months ago, and this guy was saying, so after Jesus' death and resurrection, he ascends into heaven, you have Pentecost Sunday, go the year 50 AD. So Jesus' death and resurrection is around the year 33 to the year 50. What's different in the world? What is different? What's different in the world is that Jesus established the church. It is the life of the church that is his presence in the world. So Jesus worked our salvation by his death and resurrection, brought about our redemption. But how is that presence communicated to us? It is through the life of the church. And there's 3 principal ways, and we say, who is Jesus? He's a priest, prophet, and king. So Jesus, and maybe you've heard those 3 things before. So as a prophet, Jesus is our teacher. And then as a priest, he offers sacrifice. And as a king, he is our good shepherd. Priest, prophet, and king. So to teach, to sanctify, and to shepherd. This is what the church does. And so often we associate this with what ordained priests do, or ultimately what the head priest, the Bishop of Rome, what he does, that supreme shepherd. But it's something that all the baptized are called to. Everyone who's baptized, all of you, are called in the world to be the presence of Christ by sharing the faith, by offering your own life as a sacrifice and uniting that with the Mass. And then thirdly, to be a good shepherd in the world, which is to carry out works of charity, to be the presence of Christ through your love for others. And so everyone who is baptized is called to do this. Lay people, priests, and then obviously the Bishop of Rome. And so St. Leo, for him to be a doctor of the church, and we'll get into this in a minute, why did he receive this dignity of being a doctor? There's one specific thing that really brought him to that. But in order for him to be a saint, he had to exercise those 3 offices. In a foolish way, or people who are ignorant will ask me, do you think you'll be a bishop someday? And I'm like, they're not very smart people who ask me that question. Father Washington, he never would ask me that question because he knows that that's not going to happen. So I say to be a bishop, you have to be smart, you have to be hardworking, and you have to be holy. Which I managed to do one of those, maybe one of a little bit, but never all 3. All right, never all 3. So Saint Leo the Great, I think first we should begin with his sanctity. the fact that he is a saint, and then being a doctor is built on top of that. And that's true of all of these doctors of the church, right? So first, they were saints, and then there's something specific they did or some particular insight into explaining the faith that elevates them to this role of being a doctor. So, what is his sanctity is that he was faithful to the office of being a shepherd, and that he did it both for the city of Rome, but also for the whole church at that time. And so we have I think 100. I should look it up. I did look it up. I can't remember the number. It doesn't matter. But we have about 100 letters of his and about 120 sermons. That's what we have, left over from him. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but think about that. That's 1,600 years ago. So next week, you won't be able to find one letter that I've ever written. Okay, so just next week, my life will disappear. The day after I die, it'll all just there was somebody here. I can't remember who that was. But so we remember St. Leo the Great after these many years because he exercised this pastoral office. He exercised this pastoral office. And one particular thing is the office of being Peter, the head of the apostles. And so in church history, he's known for asserting and bringing forth that office in a very clear way, which means that he wrote letters to bishops who are having fights with each other. So two bishops are fighting with each other about who has an authority over something. And so several of his letters are intervening in that situation to tell them, to figure it out, which means that he's in this position of authority. And we also have those letters of those bishops writing to him and saying, hey, come and help me. So if you appeal to someone for help, you're recognizing that they have an authority. And so St. Leo did not invent this authority. Our Protestant brothers and sisters, if you go look at, people who really hate the Catholic Church, like your hardcore Southern Baptists or really hardcore fundamentalists, they kind of pick on St. Leo as being the first one to invent this office of being, the head of the church, of the wider church or the broader church. But really, if you look at the evidence, these other bishops appealed to the Bishop of Rome as the successor of Peter, whether it was St. Leo or not. Why St. Leo is outstanding is because he was able to answer their problems and resolve them in a very good way. So he was a good shepherd. So we have, in France, there's dioceses all around there, and then they're kind of vying back and forth with each other who has authority, who can appoint bishops. So in another place, so think about it, you have Rome down in Italy, you go north across the mountains, the Alps, and up into France. It's a long ways away. Today it's a long ways away, but especially back then. So think of travel and communication. They were waiting to say, what does the successor of Peter, what does the Bishop of Rome have to say about this situation? And they looked to the Bishop of Rome, they looked to St. Leo for that. So that's kind of in the West. But not only was this in the West, but it also happened in the East. So we have the original patriarchal churches. There's 4 churches that were the 4 original seats of patriarchs in the church. So you have Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, and Rome. All right. So those are the 4 primary churches that were established during the life of the apostles, and they were given precedence over all over dioceses. And now, but what happens is Constantine, he moves the capital to Constantinople. It becomes this very large city, very powerful. And so you have the Bishop of Constantinople. He now says, I'm the patriarch. And because he's in that same city as the emperor, he begins to assert his authority over these other bishops. And not just over other bishops, but over other patriarchs. He wants to tell Antioch and Jerusalem and Alexandria what to do. And so those patriarchs, they appeal to Leo. They appeal to Rome and say, who is he to tell us what to do? We are in this episcopal see that we are patriarchs, right directly from the apostles, and no one can tell us what to do. But yet we're asking you, the successor of Peter, to resolve this situation. And so we have the letters of St. Leo where he resolves these tensions that existed not just in the Western church, but also in the Eastern church. And so, what does that mean for us today? These tensions still exist in the Eastern churches. Between, your different Orthodox churches, they kind of vie with each other about who's in charge or who can tell the other one what to do or how are things going to be decided. And what's led to a lot of stagnation is that because they were separated from Rome, they don't have anyone that can come in and kind of resolve the situation. So that kind of has... I want to be careful. There's no Orthodox here, all right? So if there was somebody who was Orthodox here, they would get mad at me for saying this. But it has led to them not being able to resolve situations because there's nobody in authority that they can appeal to. And so the office of St. Peter for the apostles is to bring the apostles together. The office of the Bishop of Rome is to fortify and to strengthen and to make sure those connections, that communion, the unity that the church is supposed to have is established. And so that down through the centuries, one pope after another, that is their vocation. Now some of the popes did a good job at that, and some did not do a good job at that, and some did a great job at that. And that's why St. Leo, that's one of the reasons why he's a saint, because he did a very good job at that. And people accepted his authority. So now we'll get to priest, prophet, and king. So that's more the kingly aspect, the shepherding aspect, where he, helped to preserve the unity of the church, and he would step in and resolve problems amongst other bishops and other church things, even outside of the city of Rome. But he also did that for the city of Rome. So the Roman Empire is collapsing, and you have different, we call them barbarians, people from north of the Alps. They come down and they slowly, little by little, they encroach upon the Roman Empire and it falls apart. And so one of the most famous of those is Attila the Hun. So you've heard of Attila the Hun. So Attila the Hun and his barbarian hordes are making their way through from the north and down into Italy. And this is the most famous. So I don't know if you looked up on Google, or just like the first thing that comes up on Google about St. Leo the Great, and if you have the Magnificat, it tells a little story about it. So I don't need to tell you the story. All right. So in 452, Attila the Hun and his army is outside north of Rome and is going to come down and lay waste to the city of Rome. So Leo goes out there, with a group of probably him and his deacons, or his clerical order that would go with him, and he pleads with Attila to not destroy the city. And Attila turns and goes away. Now there's a famous work of art, it's in the Vatican, and there's this meeting, you have Leo with Attila the Hun and his army, but behind Leo is like these two angels, like these, and so the legend is that Attila saw these two angels behind Leo, and that's what scared him to go away and not attack the city. So, but that's how it's portrayed in art. And so, did he see an angel? No, but that's a sign, a symbol of Leo's spiritual strength, was that he was able to go and intercede for the city. Now, a couple years later, Attila the Hun dies, and another barbarian comes, and Leo is still pope, and he goes out to talk to him, and he doesn't have the same success. And that guy comes, and he sacks the city of Rome, so with all his hordes. So, if you can imagine, like we always think things are bad. If we watch the news too much, especially these last month or whatever. It's the end of the world. Everything is terrible, but we don't live in Aleppo in Syria, right? We don't live in, we're not worried about, a big army from Kansas City coming down and rolling, through our city with tanks and killing us all. So it's not even a thought in our mind that could happen, right? It's not even a possibility. So that's another example of St. Leo being a good shepherd is, he went out and he spoke to this barbarian who's not a Christian and dealt with him to preserve the peace of his city. All right. Now we'll move on to the Council of Chalcedon. All right. So the Council of Chalcedon is the fourth ecumenical council. Do you remember your ecumenical councils? You're all smart people here. This is the smartest crowd here. So what's the first ecumenical council? Someone on this side of the room. Come on. What? Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea. Well, the Council of Jerusalem, that's not an ecumenical council, that's something else. All right, so the Council of Nicaea is in the year 325, all right? So we get our Nicene Creed from that. So they get together in year 325. And Nicaea is a little tiny city across the water from Constantinople. And then the second one, this is for the super smart people. Okay, we'll go to this side of the room over here. So the second ecumenical council is the Council of Constantinople. No. So that's a good guess, right? That's a good guess. So Constantinople in 381. So you go 325 to 381. And then the third ecumenical council is the Council of Ephesus in the year 431. And that's where we have the title of Mary as the Mother of God. All right? And then the fourth ecumenical council is the Council of Chalcedon, which is up near Constantinople also. So because the emperor is in Constantinople, that's where all these meetings take place. So he calls them, actually the Pope calls them, the Bishop of Rome calls them, that they met where the emperor was. Chalcedon, Chalcedon, Chalcedon. 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 So those are the four first ecumenical councils. All right. So these four ecumenical councils, 100 years later, after Leo, Pope Gregory the Great, who's the other, we'll get to him. Somebody else will get to him. So Pope Gregory the Great, he goes, as I believe in the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so I also believe in the four ecumenical councils. So they have this rank of the obedience of faith. They demand the obedience of faith. So when I read the Gospels, I listen to them, they teach me, they reveal to me who Jesus is. So when I read the ecumenical councils, they teach us and they reveal who the person of Jesus is. And so, we all had this a couple of years ago when we had a new translation of the Mass. You remember this? And we said, now we have to say the word consubstantial, right? It's all very shocking. It's like, oh, this word consubstantial. What's that?
It's been there forever.
Right. So the Greek word is homoousios. Homoousios is he's one in being, consubstantial with the Father. So that's what these ecumenical councils are trying to work out. So the heresies of the early church, they err to one side or the other. And mostly they err saying the divinity of Jesus kind of destroys the humanity of Jesus. And so they emphasize that Jesus was divine and that, he also happened to be a human being, but none of his human activity actually meant anything. And so what does this mean that Jesus he's one person with two natures? This is the thing they keep kind of trying to figure out and to define. And so Pope Leo plays an important role in this. It's called the Tome to Flavian. All right, so a tome, Tome, is like a work, it's a letter. So there's this letter that he writes to Flavian, who is the bishop of the patriarch, the bishop of Constantinople. All right. So where's my notes here? I got to get my notes. So the Pope asserted this faith in Jesus Christ, true God and true man, in an important doctrinal text addressed to the Bishop of Constantinople, the so-called Tome of Flavian, which, read at Chalcedon, was received by the bishops present with an eloquent acclamation. Now, Father Boisington came, he has notes, he went and studied this beforehand. He was trying to figure out where I was going to steal my notes from, all right? So, and he was going to say, oh, you read that in this book. And so I had to go find something very obscure, so that he couldn't do that to me. All right? I knew he was coming. So all the bishops, when they heard what it says, they all responded with this acclamation, Peter has spoken through the mouth of Leo. Peter has spoken through the mouth of Leo. So this is the ecumenical council affirming that Leo has taught them and gave them the substance of what was trying to be said at the Council of Chalcedon about who the person of Jesus is. And so this is a nice connection back to Matthew chapter 16. Jesus says, who do people say that I am? Some say John the Baptist, some say one of the prophets. And Jesus says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter gives his acclamation of recognizing this act of faith. You are the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah. So it is Peter, at the head of the apostles, who affirms who Jesus is in the Gospels. And then at the Council of Chalcedon, It is Peter, his successor, St. Leo, who emphasizes that, who says it once again, and who, by doing that, brings unity to the church. And so if the Bishop of Rome doesn't tell us who Jesus is, we don't know who Jesus is. Now that's kind of the scandal of the Catholic Church, is that God, in his providence, God in his wisdom, a wisdom that we don't quite understand, entrusts this authority to someone to always hold fast the unity of the church. And what is the unity of the church? Is the person of Jesus. It is Jesus himself. And so the Bishop of Rome, it's his office to hold that together, to always be reuniting us more and more back to Jesus. So, the Council of Chalcedon, here we go. This is a little technical, okay? So I just cut and paste this from this document about the Council of Chalcedon. So it's the Council of Chalcedon anathematized, all right? So anathema means curse, all right? So cursed is anyone who holds this view. The Council of Chalcedon anathematized those who taught that Christ had only a single divine nature and those who taught a mixture of his two natures. So that he was only divine and had no humanity, or that his divinity and his humanity were mixed, like kind of pouring, two ingredients into a bowl and mixing them together. That's not who Jesus is. The council produced the Chalcedon definition, which affirms that Christ is the same, perfect in Godhead and also perfect in manhood, truly God and truly man. He is consubstantial with the Father according to the Godhead, and consubstantial with us according to the manhood. Jesus Christ is to be acknowledged in two natures, unconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, and inseparably. The divine and human natures of Christ are distinct, yet united in one person. This coexistence of Christ's two natures is called the hypostatic union, which I'll tell you, the kids at Resurrection, they know this. Father David Lees, he came to visit a couple weeks ago. When I was gone, I was out on vacation, and he went and asked them questions, and he kept answering them harder and harder questions because they kept getting them all right. And so he asked them what that was, and one of my 8th graders said the hypostatic union. So now my 8th grade teacher wants a raise. All right? Isn't that terrible? That's awful. All right? And she should probably get one. If an 8th grader knows what the hypostatic union is, she's doing a good job. So the real point is, so I began talking about what is the church, is the presence of Christ. What are we, as baptized Christians, as being adopted into God? We are adopted into Christ. And so it's only because Jesus is truly human that he's one with us. So in the Creed on Sunday, when we say consubstantial with the Father, I'm always thinking about he's consubstantial, he is God. I'm putting him up here, he is God. But in that same moment, he's consubstantial with us. And we need to not forget that too. That is the amazing thing. And that's how he continues to be present in the world, is that he is consubstantial in his humanity. And that is a shocking thing. That is a very shocking thing. And it's something, as difficult as it is to believe that Jesus, this man who was born of a woman, who walked on 2 feet, who ate and slept and lived in a particular place in Galilee in this world, is God, all right? That's a very shocking thing. It's also very shocking, a scandal, to say that God is one with us, And so there is something in our humanity, that is able to have this union. And that's an important thing to remember when we're having a bad day, right? Or when we're not doing things so well. That our humanity has a capacity to be consubstantial with Jesus, who is consubstantial with the Father. And when we forget that, we forget what our humanity is for. I went and looked up. So this sheet that I got here is Pope Benedict gave this talk in 2008. So he did this whole series of lectures on the church fathers, on these different saints. So that's the obscure text that I found. So, and Pope Benedict is a very concise, very clear teacher. So he's great. If you want to get like a nice 3 pages on any subject, go read Pope Benedict, because it just brings light to everything. But I got on YouTube and I looked for like the fall of the Roman Empire, and this history professor, he says we don't really know who the barbarians were. We don't know who the Vandals were, or the Visigoths, or all these different. Because we'll find like a spear, or we'll find a sword, or we'll find some trinket that they were buried with, but we really don't know who they are. And so now they're trying to do all this work by testing their genes. All right, so they're doing DNA testing on these skeletons of these different burial grounds. They're excavating these archaeological things from the 400s and the 300s to figure out who these people are. And he goes, but the professor, he was good. He says, even if we do this perfectly, it still won't let us know who they are. But who reveals to us our humanity? Jesus does. Jesus does. It is Jesus who reveals to us what it means to be human. So in the world, we have all these different cultures, and that's what was happening during the time of Leo. You have the Roman culture, and you have the Greek culture, and then you have the barbarians. You have all these different cultures are clashing with each other. And in the city of Rome itself, you had armies coming to destroy the city, and then if you have that, you have refugees. I mean, anytime you have war, you have people escaping war, refugees would come to the city seeking shelter. So different languages and different customs, and yet, the church was able to persevere, and the church was able to bring light to those people. 1,600 years ago. And so that same church is able to do that now, not because we're so wise or because we're so smart, is when we adhere to Christ, is when we adhere to the gospel, the good news that Jesus is truly God and truly man. That in our humanity is built in a desire for God, is built in a capacity for God. And so when we honor that and recognize that in ourselves, then right away we can begin to honor it and recognize it in other people. And if I don't recognize it in myself, I'm never going to see it in you, right? So we're never going to see it in somebody else if I don't see it in myself. And so the saints, they bring light to the situation. When you're around a saint, they bring light to the situation, they bring clarity to the situation. Leo did that when you had 2 bishops arguing with each other. Leo did that when you had Attila the Hun coming, to the walls of Rome. Leo did that at the Council of Chalcedon. He brought light to the situation. Because first and foremost, it was the light of faith that was in his own existence that revealed to him who Jesus was. So, if there's one thing I want you to remember tonight, is that, what are we going to remember about St. Leo? We really don't remember his pastoring or his shepherding things, like how he dealt with a certain situation. We really don't remember that. But what we do remember is what he wrote and what was put down in the Council of Chalcedon. That perseveres, and that keeps the church faithful to the teaching of who the person of Jesus is. And that's why he's a doctor of the church. So.